Peace and blessings be upon you, Juma Mubarak. Wanted to make a short talk to help people who are struggling. I see a lot of suffering on the internet. People are suffering in Gaza. People are suffering in Yemen. People are suffering in Kenya. To different degrees. They're a little bit better off in Yemen than in Gaza. Actually, it's a big difference. They're significantly better off in Yemen, and it's tough in Yemen. And they're better off in Kenya than in Yemen, and they're having a tough time in Kenya right now. Hopefully, it will get better soon. And we all make du'as for these situations, and God permits a certain amount of suffering. And sometimes it has to do with floods from rainfall. People's homes are washed away. They become refugees in their own country. Sometimes it has to do with warfare, and you find yourself confronted with horrific images. Young people who deserved shelter and education, and they got physically destroyed. And we turn to religion to confront this problem of evil. But then we also find a lot of people who are struggling in religion, and there's a problem of evil within religion as well. There are a lot of evil religious people. And when you get involved in religion, especially on social media, but also sometimes at a church or a masjid, you find yourself confronting evil in your co-religionists, possibly even in a imam or preacher in their speeches. Maybe they get political. Maybe they support what you believe is politically evil. And this can be challenging because they are, at least subtly, associating themselves with God by representing authority. Whether or not this is a shirk depends on how you translate Yah, Yushrik. And so the other one that's challenging is how you translate kafaru, to make kufr, to cover up the truth or to reject the truth, which is often translated as disbelieve, while shirk is I would say mistranslated as associate. The brain is an association machine. It's almost impossible to not associate. For instance, you're looking at a bush, or maybe you're not looking at it. Maybe you're doing something else and listening in the background, which is part of the intended usage of this kind of content. It's not so much about what I'm saying as how I'm saying it. Inshallah, what I'm saying will also be helpful to you. And in an orthodoxy, what is disbelief becomes incredibly formally constructed. And by incredibly, I don't just mean to a large extent. I mean in the etymological sense of credible and in that it is not believable for most people to be 100% orthodox. And when we look at the history of religions, we find that orthodoxy is a social construct. And it is possible to parse the Quran in a way where the Quran is a treatise on a natural theology that is free of the incredible precision of man made orthodoxy. So then, in fringe movements, whether you're a progressive Sunni, non denominational Muslim, you've perhaps left Islam in some some degree overtly in your mind, and you are still interested in religion, in perennial wisdom and esotericism, etc., or perhaps you're a Shia, or perhaps you're a Quranist, and the criticism of orthodoxy that is in a majoritarian posture, arguing that God willed the majority and what is in the majority must be true. And then you go to the other part of this dialectic of kufr and shirk that the Quran presents. So you are rejecting and you are making the argument that what they are doing is not believing in the truth, but making undue associations. And we see this particularly in Quranism, where people are reading, funnily enough, translations of the Quran that are done by 20th century Salafi influenced Sunnis. They're not strictly speaking necessarily Salafists, but the influence of the Salafist Protestant Reformation is undeniable. And this has an effect also in the Quranism movement, in Khomenism of Twelver Shiism, and so on. It affects everyone, even non-Muslims, because after all, if it wasn't for Salafism, would the violent incidences that have sparked a number of political blowbacks against Muslims be possible? That's debatable. I don't want to oversimplify and assume counterfactuals. But we're certainly all influenced by Salafism. Christians are influenced by Salafism. 9/11 happened. It changed the course of American history. America, the United States of America, celebrated its birthday, which Salafists consider haram. And the irony is richer than a smoked pork rib and perhaps less haram. Because what America was founded on, America's two continents, what the United States of America as a nation was founded on, has been corrupted by Salafism. And also, in a sense, what the United States of America was founded on was a Christian Protestant vein. Arguably, even within it, it came out of very obviously Freemasonry, but also variations on the Kantian Lutheran ethos with some further refinements in the Enlightenment. And then in its environment, we had a second Reformation in Christianity. We had, for instance, Seventh day Adventists who presumed a Unitarian theology until eventually, through the beauty of Taqlid, they became Trinitarians once again. And there are a number of other Unitarian Christian groups that grew up in the United States. And you even have some tritheists and modalists and subordinationists and so on. And when they say God bless America, and we contemplate how far the meaning of there's no compulsion in the deen, in religion, goes, then indeed God bless America, because that freedom of religion is the freedom to not associate, to not buy into what is wrong with orthodoxy. And now there are many Americans and many Europeans, many Japanese, and so forth, people, many Latin Americans, people of all walks of life who are coming to Islam 23 years almost, would be 22 years and 10 months after the 9/11 attacks, where it was difficult to become a Muslim. It's become easier, and the internet's made it easier. And social media has insidiously become a masterpiece of dawah. And yet, the churn rate of conversion to Islam is significant because we are all thinking adults and we have access to information on the internet. And this makes religious orthodoxy much, much more complex. And something similar happens to Muslim youth at some time in their teens or their early 20s. Um, it's likely to happen sooner or later. You might have a wave of intense fervor. Perhaps you join a specific sect in your late teens. Perhaps you marry early as a countercultural act and then find your specific interpretation reinforced by that relationship. Perhaps the relationship is violent and repels you from religion. There are a number of paths in the pathology of why people convert, switch sects, and leave religion. And these are all processes of self discovery, of learning, and of perhaps discovering God. And that last one is the big variable because it's not guaranteed. So I find that there are many people who have a lot of doubts. They deal with questions about relationships, they deal with questions about the duration of punishment in the Akhirah, they deal with scriptural quibbles, taking specific things in the Quran as an intentional condescension by God, or taking them literally, or taking them metaphorically. At a higher level of study, people delve into the history of religion and find that there are a number of sociological cross currents where Judaism and Christianity and Islam have things in common with Zoroastrianism and Buddhism and Greek mythology and Orphic mysteries and Hindu background influence and so on and so forth. And yet, what I have found in my journey back into religion after being a secular humanist for many years in my adulthood. So I went through the same thing that many of you have gone through. And I even made a good go of it for quite a while. And I made mistakes, and I also tried to live true to an ethos of virtue that you might say was post Christian. And this is why sociologists of religion make a good argument that leftism, liberalism, Marxism, and so on, these secular yet assertive of universal morality ideologies, are post Christian ideologies. And if you want to see a society that is secular and not post Christian, consider the aggressively materialistic empiricism of modern China, where 40 million Hui Muslims are being incrementally persecuted by their government, and millions of Uyghur Muslims are suffering under much worse. And may Allah ease their burdens. So, when you are considering leaving Islam because the Muslims are very troublesome, know that you are not alone. And the way that the ideology of those satanic Muslims works is it requires a violent assertion of political dominance and a totalizing pressure cooker environment. But what happened historically is that that was not competitive with what you might assume to be more secular, or you might assume to be more divinely guided, more freedom assertive forms of ideology and human organization. And if you look closely at the Quran, you may find that this is actually what God intended all along. And we have simply accepted a tafsir where some verses don't really mean what they seem to be saying, or they only mean it in a limited sense in regards to government tax revenue, but not in a profound sense. And then these other verses mean so much, and they have so much to weigh on you. And then even wiping away these political tafsirs and mistranslations that embed tafsir, and wiping away the malicious khutbas of an atavistic imam. Or, for example, there was a sister who sadly has been a victim of abuse from her father for many years, for almost 12 years. And she's now looking to get a new life and get out of the house. And another friend was trying to help her to fundraise so she could afford to get her own apartment. Ultimately, I think she found a path of moving in with some friendly sisters. Inshallah, she will be delivered from her plight. And some fellows, I don't know if I can call them brothers, but some brothers in the deen thought that it was not fair to the father that this had come out on social media, and they doxed her and she deleted her account. And this interrupted any attempts at a fundraise, so she had to use secondary channels to find roommates and solve her living situation dilemma. And this is just one example of many. And indeed, there have been hundreds of thousands of fatalities that could have been avoided if other people thinking in ultimately the same way had not done their evil deeds in the name of Islam. And the fires of sectarianism aren't going to put out this fire. Only water can put it out. The voodoo of deeper understanding and forgiving each other, inshallah. So, I want you to know, when you are focused on the compelling rhetoric of the Quran and its apparent bind that it puts on you, and the social reinforcement of mostly young men who insist that this is what not just religion, but indeed ultimate reality, the totality of all being is all about, is obsequience to power instead of all the other things that are in the Quran and the other revelations, the nice things, the beautiful things, that emphasis is not correct. And you don't have to leave to be free of it. You can simply practice Islam in a simple way. I go outside at night and pray Isha, and I look up at the stars and make zikr when it's not cloudy. And I have this garden, which is not even tremendously cultivated. It's just some land that we've handled with some amount of care. We've taken cuttings from the neighbors, and there's the rabbits chewing on it. There's a hadith that anything that an animal eats that you put in the ground is written as a good deed for you. This is the kind of a nice thing that we should be focusing on. And subhanallah, when you put what seems like a dead stick in the ground and you check back and it's sprouting roots and it's sprouting buds of greenery to collect solar energy, that's a beautiful thing. It's a very beautiful thing. And these are the signs that the Quran talks about. These are the signs of Allah. So your faith might be like a chewed up stick that could have been discarded and burnt for fuel, but certainly doesn't have to be. You can put it in the ground and it can resurrect some greenery. And that color green, which is in a very narrow part of the color spectrum, we don't see it in space because space is too dynamic and violent. It exists at the 528 hertz band of frequency in the light waves. And it represents something very special. It is energy condensed to a balance that nurtures us. And if you want it, you can have that for your own soul. Just don't leave